to your second lesson on fighting for a cause. Today, second grade, you'll be learning about Susan B. Anthony. It says she's an advocate for women's rights. So that means that she fought for women's rights. She fought for the equality for women. Let's go ahead and look at our vocabulary today, and then we'll talk more about our goal and what we want to listen for during today's text. Your first word to listen for, which I know you guys, I know you know this word, is my turn, abolitionist. Your turn. Good. It's people who work to say bye-bye to slavery or to end slavery. In a sentence, many abolitionists worked tirelessly to end slavery in the United States. Of course, we talked a lot about that word in our Civil War domain. The next word to listen for is actually your word of the day. My turn, ballot. Your turn. Good. That's just a slip of paper used to cast or record votes. With that being said, if we had been in the classroom together a few weeks ago when I had you vote for your favorite fairy tale, I might have given you a piece of paper that looked like this. And this says favorite fairy tale. Well, this is a ballot. And you would have marked or checked the box of Beauty and the Beast, Fisherman and His Wife, or Emperor's New Clothes. So that's just an example of a ballot. At the end of today's lesson, I'll give you some examples of what you and your family can talk about when you're having your conversation using the word ballot. The next word to listen for is my turn, influential. Your turn. Good. And that means having the ability to persuade or talk someone into something. The young politician was so influential that he was able to persuade members of the opposing party to change their minds. That's also what a good author may do. Remember, persuade is a piece of the pie. But again, that means influential. The next word to listen for is my turn, jury. Your turn. Good. And that is a group of people selected to listen to evidence in a trial and decide on a verdict, whether you're guilty or not guilty. So the jury may have to decide if you were the one that stole the cookie out of the cookie jar. With that being said, here's a sentence. The jury was unanimous. That means they all agreed in its decision that the defendant was not guilty. They didn't steal the cookie from the cookie jar. Moving on for the next word to listen for. This is my turn, suffrage. Your turn. That's it. This means the right to vote. The right to vote. Susan B. Anthony fought for women's suffrage, or the right to vote, during her lifetime. Now we're going to go ahead and skip our little preview and get on to our text. And I just want to explain today what you're listening for. You see, Susan B. Anthony, you're going to learn today that she used words to fight for what she believed in. And so as you hear this in our story today, I want you to decide if you think using words is a good idea when you believe in something, when you're fighting for something, for a cause. So listen to what she does today. Listen to decide if you think using words is the best way when you are fighting for a cause. And that would be another example of using a nonviolent way. We talked about that on Monday versus a violent way. So let's go ahead and dive into Susan B. Anthony and listen for the time in the story when she uses words to really fight for her cause. Susan B. Anthony was born a very long time ago in the state of Massachusetts in the year 1820. It's a couple hundred years ago. When she was a little girl, she did not know that she would grow up to become so influential. Remember, that means she had the ability to change people's minds, or she was able to convince them to do something. But that was going to be her destiny. Her family certainly helped to shape the person she was to become. Susan's family was different from many other families. They were Quakers. Now, a Quaker is a member of a religious group called the Religious Society of Friends. Quakers believe that all people are equal. Susan's family did not judge people based on their color or whether they were male or female, meaning boy or girl. In their eyes, everyone was equal. But for a long time, when Susan was a little girl, not everyone thought that way. For one thing, many people thought it was more important for boys to be educated than it was for girls or people of color. Think about that for just a moment. How would you have felt if that were the case? Also think about this. How would you feel if only boys could go to school? Susan was lucky because her parents did not agree with this view. They wanted their daughter to receive an excellent education. And so this is Susan when she was in school. When Susan was just 6, so close to your age, she went to school. One day, a teacher at the school refused to teach Susan a difficult math problem because she was a girl. As a result, her parents decided that Susan should be educated at home. Later, Susan attended a Quaker boarding school near the city of Philadelphia. Now, a boarding school is very unique. It's one where students live at the school rather than going home at the end of the day. When her parents struggled to pay the fees for this, however, she had to leave school and finish her education at home. Later, Susan became a teacher. Susan eventually became a headmistress, which is almost like a principal. She was the person in charge of her school. Susan worked hard to help her family financially. Susan quickly discovered, though, that female teachers earned way less money than male teachers for doing the very same job. So what that meant would be that Mr. Holly would get more money or get more pay than Miss Horn and myself. When Susan was 29 years old, she left the world of education and settled back in her family home. Susan's family was now living in New York, Rochester, New York. It was during this time that she met some very brave people who were trying to, my turn, abolish, your turn, good, say bye-bye to slavery in the United States. These people, as we know, are called abolitionists. Secret meetings were held late at night in her family home. Susan became involved too. Her heart began to tell her that it was important that she try to make the world a fairer place. So Susan decided that she would join the fight to abolish or end slavery. That was a long and difficult journey. In the early days of the Civil War, Susan helped to organize women's groups to speak out about slavery. This was not an easy thing to do. Back then, people did not have computers or cell phones. Susan and her supporters had to travel in a horse-drawn carriage and communicate by letter. Newspapers printed many articles that criticized her views and called her a troublemaker. Susan did not care. She was fearless. That means she was not full of fear. Hopefully you all remember Abraham Lincoln. While the Civil War raged in January of 1863, President Abraham Lincoln took an important step towards ending slavery when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, or as we remember, the Big EP. This proclamation or statement announced that the government intended to free all slaves in the United States. This meant that former slaves could make decisions about their own lives and they could receive money for the work they did. So in December 1865, after the Civil War, slavery was abolished or ended completely. In the next few years after the war, the law was changed so that former slaves became citizens and male slaves were given the right to vote. Well, Susan was very happy that the former male slaves had gained these rights, but she was extremely unhappy that women did not have the same rights. So the next fight was about to begin. For Susan and many others, they did not want to fight. They did not want to fight with violence. For them, the fight was one in which they would work hard to end the unfairness that they saw. It might be difficult to believe now, but when Susan was alive, women had very few rights. As you have discovered, back then, many people did not think it was important to educate girls. Women had very limited roles or small jobs in their communities. They could attend meetings, but they were not allowed to speak in public or hold office or even vote. Women were not allowed to become doctors or lawyers. Few girls stayed in school beyond the 8th grade. Married women could not own property. If they did own property before they got married, they had to turn it over to their husbands after they got married. Susan had hoped that former abolitionists would now support women's rights. She was disappointed to discover that many men who had helped to abolish slavery did not believe that women should have suffrage or the right to vote. Susan was determined to change this view. She joined forces with two other women. One lady is Amelia Bloomer, and the other lady is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Together they began to fight for women's rights. Women like Susan, who campaigned against these laws, became known as suffragettes. Cool word. My turn, suffragettes. Your turn. Or people who fought for women's rights. Susan became secretary at the American Equal Rights Association. She traveled all over the country by wagon, carriage, and train, speaking for women's suffrage or the right to vote. She organized petitions and clubs, and she wrote newspaper articles. Susan also became the publisher of The Revolution, which is this newspaper right here, dedicated to women's issues. And this meant that she was in charge of the newspaper. Printed on the front page of this newspaper were these words: men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less. This is a great time to pause the video and have a conversation with your family. Men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less. What does that mean? Susan invested her own money in the newspaper, continuing the fight for women's rights. Susan also helped to found or start the National Suffrage Association. When Susan ran out of money, she gave up her position at the newspaper and had to find another way to make money. She began to tour the country, speaking to groups that paid to hear her speak. Now, this next slide is probably one of my favorite stories in all of second grade CKLA. I think it is so cool and almost funny. Susan was in her 50s when she took her campaign one step further. She tried to cast her vote for president, and this just means she tried to vote. She and several other women marched into a New York barbershop where only men or males were allowed, of course, to get their hair cut, but they only allowed male voters in to vote. They had to vote in a barbershop. The women held a protest. They demanded the right to vote right here in a barbershop. The men in charge were unsure of what to do. They were unable to stop the women, so the women finally voted in the election. And so, in 1872, about 50 years before it was legal to do so, Susan and the other women cast their ballots, they're just like a piece of paper, they're voting for the President of the United States. But 2 weeks later, Susan was arrested and charged with illegal voting. Her arrest caused a national uproar. Susan was not afraid, though. She asked the general public to consider, is it a crime for a United States citizen to vote? The judge in the trial did not think women should have the right to vote. He decided against Susan before the trial even started. He did not even let her talk. He ordered the jury to find her guilty. Remember, a jury is a group of people who sit at a trial and decide whether someone is guilty of the crime in which they were charged. He then asked Susan if she had anything to say. And this is possibly what a courtroom looks like now, and it was probably similar back then. And this is what was said. So listen to this, because this is where she's using her words, and I want you to think about if using your words is enough or the right thing to do when it comes to fighting for a cause. I have many things to say, for in your ordered verdict of guilty, you have trampled underfoot every vital principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, my judicial rights are all alike ignored. So Susan was saying that all of her rights were being violated, not only because she could not legally vote, but because this judge didn't even let her talk at her own trial. The judge tried to quiet Susan, but she continued to speak over him. He sentenced her to pay a fine of $100. Susan's response was to say, I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty, and she never did. And so by the end of the 19th century, okay, so we're looking at the late 1800s here, people's views about Susan B. Anthony began to change, and she actually became a national hero or heroine, which is actually a female hero. Susan continued to travel the country speaking for women's voting rights. Now people couldn't wait to hear her speak. She became president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, a job she held until she was 80 years old when she retired. 6 years later, though, on March 13, 1906, Susan B. Anthony died in Rochester, New York. She had worked for more than 50 years, a half of a century, for women's rights. Although she did not live to see women get the right to vote, when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution passed in 1920, so just 100 years ago, she had helped to make it happen. Susan B. Anthony was quite an amazing woman. She was prepared to stand up and fight for what she believed was right. Now, do you think you would have had enough courage to do the same thing? And this is a great stopping point to answer that question as well. But remember, here's what happened. She used words to fight for what she believed in. So here's your question today. Do you think using words is a good idea to fight for your cause or a cause or even equality? Now, again, this is a great pausing point, but I'm going to add a little bit more to our video with our word of the day. So let's continue with the word ballot. And once again, I'll skip through these questions, and we'll get to our word of the day. Feel that we're almost there. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, I think it's after this. Here we go. Again, word of the day is ballot. In our text to read aloud today, here's what was said. And so, in 1872, about 50 years before it was legal to do so, Susan and the other women cast their ballots for president of the United States. Remember the definition? Ballots are just slips of paper used to cast or record your votes. Another sentence, John found 2 extra ballots lying on the floor, which changed the final number of votes. So just a few conversation pieces right here that you can pause the video and talk about. It says, if you could cast a ballot about something, what would it be? Try to use the word ballots when you tell about it. Here's a sentence starter. We should cast our ballots for. You all can go ahead and have it even a further your conversation with what part of speech is the word ballots. Yes, it's a noun, but how do you know it's a noun? So again, you can stop the video right here and have a great conversation about a word of the day. But one more thing to add to that, my favorite, thumbs up, thumbs down. You can add this to your conversation. Thumbs up if you think, yes, it means ballot. Thumbs down if you think the sentence is not a ballot. So here are your sentences. Number 1, teachers should give more homework every night. Number 2, our class should take a field trip to the zoo. Number 3, children should go to school on Saturdays and Sundays. Number 4, teachers should never give tests. And number 5, our class should have cookies and milk. So you can pause right here and play the little game of thumbs up, thumbs down. Of course, this would be if we were in the classroom right now, but you know what? Just have fun with it. So, I hope you have enjoyed learning more about Susan B. Anthony. I hope you enjoy having a conversation about her and your word of the day. If you want to dojo me with any questions or dojo me with what you've learned or using your word in a sentence, I would love to hear from you. And before I sign off today, I've been thinking a lot about you guys, and so I had to wear my new favorite shirt. Of course, I've had this shirt for a while, but this was our class shirt, and it is becoming my favorite shirt because I miss you all so much. So, in honor of you all today, I wore my class shirt. I think all 2nd graders have this one, just maybe in different colors. We are family at ISC, and I want you to remember that. We are family, whether we're together in a classroom or we are doing like this virtual online learning. I love and miss you guys. I will see you, hopefully you're watching us on Wednesday morning, and I'll see you at our Google Hangout at 1 o'clock. Love you, bye.